CEO Gregory Fallon shoved my office door open hard enough to rattle the glass. You need to pack up, now. No greeting, no warning, just authority crashing into my workspace like it belonged to him. He didn't wait for permission to enter, he never did. Gregory stood there in his tailored suit, jaw set, eyes already finished with me. HR hovered behind him, clutching a folder like a shield. I didn't stand. Shock pinned me to my chair. For 15 years. This room had been my operational nerve center. I was head of strategic operations, the person who translated executive ambition into systems that survived pressure. When plans broke, I fixed them. When growth threatened to collapse under its own weight, I built structure. Gregory knew that. He also hated it. We're making leadership changes, he said briskly. Your role is no longer required. I asked him to repeat it, not because I hadn't heard, but because I needed to hear how casually he would erase me. He sighed, irritated. You're replaceable. Molly, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. The word hit harder than the termination. Replaceable. As if judgment, memory, and accountability were accessories. I felt heat rise in my chest and forced it down. Reacting would only feed him. What about my shares, I asked. Gregory didn't blink. Those were always conditional. He turned slightly so HR could hear. They never vested. 15 years of promises dissolved into corporate phrasing. I reminded him, calmly, that the company had survived 2 restructurings and 1 near collapse because I rebuilt its operational spine. Gregory smiled thinly. A smile meant for subordinates who forgot their place. You supported the vision, he said. You didn't own it. That was the humiliation, not the firing, but the rewrite. I nodded once, gathered my notebook, and stood. Gregory stepped aside immediately, already moving on. As I walked past him, my attorney remained seated in the corner, unnoticed. He closed his folder slowly and looked up at HR. Before you leave, he said evenly, I'll need copies of Ms. Davis's original shareholder agreements. That kind of moment leaves a mark. If you've ever had someone reduce years of effort to a single sentence, how are you feeling right now? Take a quiet minute and write down one thing you've done in your career that you're still proud of just for yourself. Tell me where you're listening from. And if this story speaks to you, stay with me and subscribe, because what comes next is where the balance starts to shift. By the time I reached my car, my email was already dead. The familiar login screen rejected me without explanation, as if 15 years of access could vanish by administrative reflex. Later that afternoon, a colleague texted to ask why my name had disappeared from the strategic roadmap I had written 3 months earlier. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The message was clear erase first, justify later. Anger came quietly. It didn't explode. It pressed inward, tightening my chest as I replayed the years I had spent patching the cracks Gregory Fallon left behind. When vendors walked away, I renegotiated. When his expansion plans overreached, I rebuilt the operational backbone to keep the company standing. I remembered nights rewriting processes so his presentations wouldn't collapse under scrutiny. Each fix made him look decisive. Each silence made me invisible. That pattern had followed Gregory's rise. He collected credit the way others collected data, selectively and without apology. When results were strong, he stood front and center. When consequences arrived, he stepped aside. I had watched capable leaders leave because they asked questions he couldn't control. Independence unsettled him. Competence without deference frightened him even more. The pressure sharpened the next morning when HR finally called. The tone was rehearsed, sympathetic, hollow. I asked the question everyone pretends not to understand. What about my equity? There was a pause. Then a sentence delivered like policy. Not truth. No equity is owed. Molly. They repeated it once, slower, as if clarity required volume. I ended the call politely, hands shaking just enough to notice. 15 years reduced to a checkbox. I felt the urge to push back, to argue, to demand recognition. Instead, I sat still and let the weight settle. Fighting now would only confirm the story Gregory wanted told. That restraint made space for something else. My attorney called shortly after, voice steady, analytical. He had reviewed the original agreements again. Vesting, he explained, had been deferred, not revoked. The distinction mattered more than they realized. Ownership had been stalled, but authority hadn't vanished with it. When I hung up, the anger finally stopped pressing inward. It didn't disappear, it organized. If they thought silence meant surrender, they had misunderstood me entirely. I stayed at the kitchen table that evening, staring at documents I once trusted, feeling the pressure thicken into resolve. Gregory believed time erased leverage. He was wrong. The systems I built taught me patience, sequencing, and consequence. I didn't need noise, I needed accuracy, and somewhere between frustration and control, a narrow path opened, one he never imagined I could still walk. It would demand restraint, timing, and a willingness to let others underestimate me first. That miscalculation would cost him everything, just not all at once. Slowly, publicly, permanently, and entirely by his own rules. Calm arrived where anger had been the night before. Not relief, not acceptance, just a steady quiet that allowed me to read without flinching. I spread the agreements across my kitchen table, the same documents Gregory Fallon had dismissed as standard. I didn't skim. I read them the way I had always built systems line by line, assumption by assumption. That was when the distinction surfaced. My economic rights, the part everyone fixated on, were tied to deferred vesting, ownership, value, payout all paused, all arguable. But voting rights lived in a different section entirely. They weren't conditional. They weren't revoked. They were never even discussed in the termination paperwork. Economic interest and authority had been treated as the same thing for so long that no one noticed they weren't. I read the paragraph again. Slower. Then a third time. There it was. Precise and unambiguous. I didn't feel excitement. I felt clarity. The company hadn't taken my voice. They had simply assumed I wouldn't realize it was still mine. The obvious move would have been to sue. Everyone expects noise. Lawsuits create headlines, sides, drama. Gregory would have welcomed that. Conflict led him posture as decisive. Wronged, righteous. I had spent 15 years watching him thrive on confrontation, while others burned out. I wasn't interested in giving him another stage, so I chose silence. No filings, no threats, no public demands. If they had truly stripped me of authority, I would have fought. But they hadn't. If they kept my voice, they'd have nothing to fear. That sentence settled into my thinking like a rule, not a boast. With calm came alertness. I stopped thinking about what I'd lost and started mapping what still connected to me. Governance, process, timing. The same principles I used to stabilize failing divisions now applied to my own position. This wasn't about retaliation. It was about sequence. My phone rang while I was marking a margin. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it. Then the caller spoke my name carefully, as if testing the weight of it. Victor Lane introduced himself without ceremony. CEO, competitor. He said he had been watching what happened inside Gregory's company with professional interest. I hear you're quieter than expected, he said. I told him I preferred accuracy to noise. He laughed once, short and controlled. He wasn't calling to offer sympathy. He was calling because he understood leverage when he saw it. As we spoke, something hardened in me, not anger, not bitterness, but precision. Gregory believed control came from stripping people down. Victor understood it came from knowing exactly what remained. I ended the call without agreeing to anything, but the path had sharpened. Calm had turned into awareness. Awareness into intent. Whatever came next would be deliberate, measured, and impossible to dismiss. They had forgotten one thing. I hadn't. That oversight would soon become painfully undeniable. I met Victor Lane 2 days later in a conference room that didn't belong to either of us. Neutral ground mattered. Control starts with choosing where a conversation happens. Victor didn't waste time with sympathy. He asked one question. "What do you still control?" I answered honestly. "I didn't sell shares. I didn't sell the company. I sold voting authority, temporarily, and only because the contracts allowed it. Proxy voting, clean, legal, precise. Ownership stayed where it was. My name stayed on the cap table, my voice. However, could be delegated. That distinction was the entire point." Victor leaned back, measuring me. "I don't want your company," he said. "I want daylight." That was acceptable. I slid the draft agreement across the table. It was short on drama and heavy on limits. No acquisition attempts. No board stacking beyond a single vote. One purpose: only trigger independent governance review and an external audit. Transparency, not conquest. The ethics clause slowed him. It always does. I watched him read it twice. "You're tying my hands," he said. "I'm protecting mine," I replied. Cold, factual, finished. The structure was simple. He would hold my voting power for a defined window. He could use it once, in one meeting, to force questions Gregory Fallon had avoided for years. After that, the authority returned to me automatically. No extensions, no improvisation. If he violated the terms, the proxy collapsed instantly. Victor asked about money. I named a number that reflected risk, not revenge. He nodded. No negotiation. That surprised me less than it should have. Experienced operators recognize leverage when it's clean. The tension peaked when he reached the final page. That was where I placed the reversion clause. Upon completion of the stated objectives. It read, "All voting rights revert to Molly Davis for nominal consideration." Victor looked up. $1 A symbol, I said. And a reminder. He signed without ceremony. No speech, no threats, just ink. The moment passed quietly, which is how real power shifts usually happen. When I left the building, I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Control doesn't come from escalation. It comes from narrowing options until only one move remains. Gregory thought I'd walked away empty-handed. In truth, I had just placed my voice exactly where it would be heard the loudest. And only for as long as necessary. I didn't celebrate afterward. I documented everything, time-stamped every clause, and stored copies where emotions couldn't reach them. This wasn't bravado. It was preparation. Once power moves, it attracts attention, scrutiny, and fear. I welcomed all three, because when this agreement surfaced, it would do exactly what it was designed to do: expose control without ever appearing hostile. That understanding kept my hands steady and my silence intact, while the board remained comfortably unaware of everything unfolding. The meeting was called with less than 24 hours' notice, which alone was enough to tighten the room before anyone spoke. I joined remotely, camera off, listening as directors exchanged polite greetings that sounded rehearsed. Tension sat under every sentence. Gregory Fallon controlled those rooms by habit, and everyone knew it. That changed when Victor Lane introduced himself. "I'm here as proxy holder for Molly Davis," he said, evenly. And the line went silent. Chairs shifted. Papers stopped moving. Gregory broke first. "This is a betrayal," he snapped. "She has no authority to do this." His voice rose as he searched for support that didn't arrive. Victor didn't argue. He simply referenced the agreement and requested his voting rights be recognized. Surprise rippled through the board. Some members looked confused. Others looked uncomfortable. Which was worse? Gregory accused me again, louder, claiming I was sabotaging the company out of spite. I watched him unravel with professional distance. Anger always made him careless. Victor waited until the noise burned itself out. "I'm exercising one vote," he said, "to initiate an independent audit and governance review." The words landed clean and final. There was no speech, no justification, just procedure. The vote was taken quickly, almost mechanically. And it passed. I felt the shift immediately, like pressure changing altitude. Gregory leaned forward, furious. "You can't be serious," he said. This is outrageous. Rachel Bloom cleared her throat. Calm, precise. She explained that the motion was valid and the audit mandatory under company policy. Gregory turned toward her, stunned, as if loyalty should override structure. Then came the moment no one expected. Rachel added that, due to the scope of the audit, Gregory's voting authority would be temporarily suspended to avoid conflicts of interest. The room froze. Directors stared at their screens. Gregory laughed once, sharp and hollow, before realizing no one was laughing back. Confusion followed shock. Questions overlapped. Timelines blurred. Gregory demanded explanations that no longer belonged to him. I stayed silent, watching control slip from his hands without resistance. When the meeting adjourned, nothing felt resolved. Everything felt unstable. Gregory had lost his voice in the very room he once ruled, and the board didn't know what that meant yet. Neither did he. That uncertainty lingered long after the call ended, heavy and unavoidable, signaling that whatever came next would not be managed on his terms anymore. I closed my laptop slowly, hands steady, heart racing beneath the surface. This was the first crack, not the collapse. The audit would open doors no one planned to walk through, and Gregory knew it. His certainty had evaporated, replaced by fear he couldn't manage. The board felt it too. From that moment on, every decision would carry weight, and none of it would be mine to announce to anyone watching closely today. The pressure arrived in waves after the board meeting ended. Gregory Fallon didn't wait long. His first call came that night. Voice tight, controlled, and sharpened by panic. He accused me of sabotage, of colluding with competitors, of trying to destroy the company I had helped build. By morning, the accusations spread. Anonymous tips reached staff. My name appeared beside words like disloyal and reckless. Gregory needed a villain, and he chose loudly. I said nothing. Silence wasn't weakness. It was insulation. Every response would have fed his narrative. I let the noise travel without me. While he threatened reputation, I protected position. Pressure works best on people who react. I refused to. The threats escalated. His messages turned personal, hinting at lawsuits, at industry blacklists, at consequences he believed still belonged to him. "You're finished if you don't undo this," he said in one voicemail. Breath uneven. I saved it and didn't reply. Fear had replaced authority in his tone, and that told me everything I needed to know. 3 days later, the formal notice arrived. Gregory filed suit for breach of loyalty, claiming my proxy agreement violated fiduciary duty. The filing was aggressive, public, and sloppy. He wanted speed, not accuracy. He wanted pressure to force retreat. Instead, it triggered review. We assembled for an emergency legal session with the board. Gregory spoke first, rehearsed and indignant, painting himself as protector and me as traitor. I listened, hands folded, heart steady. When he finished, Rachel Bloom asked for a pause. Her voice cut through the room with surgical calm. She requested a continuance, not for negotiation, for verification. Rachel had found something Gregory hadn't expected anyone to read. A clause buried in the original retention agreement, authorizing proxy delegation under defined circumstances. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was Gregory's. Dated 15 years earlier, back when he served as CFO and drafted the policy himself. The room shifted. Gregory's face drained as Rachel explained the implications. The lawsuit could not proceed until conflicts were resolved. His own authorization had enabled the very action he now condemned. The irony was absolute. For the first time since this began, Gregory had no response. Pressure gave way to exposure. Threats collapsed into accountability. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. As the meeting adjourned, Gregory stared at me with something new in his eyes. Not anger, recognition. He understood then that this wasn't retaliation. It was consequence, unfolding patiently. By rules he had written himself. I felt the confrontation settle, heavy but controlled, knowing the balance had shifted permanently. Gregory was still fighting shadows, while I stood inside process and proof. This wasn't personal anymore. It was structural, inevitable, and already moving forward without him from this moment. The room felt different before anyone spoke, as if gravity had quietly increased. We had reconvened to address what was now being called a procedural clarification, though everyone understood it was something far more dangerous. Rachel Bloom sat upright at the table, a single document placed neatly in front of her. I remained silent, listening, letting the moment unfold without interference. Rachel adjusted her glasses and began to read. Her voice was calm, almost clinical, as she walked the board through the language Gregory Fallon had tried to weaponize, clause by clause. She stripped away his argument, replacing outrage with precision. Each sentence tightened the air. No one interrupted. No one dared. Then she reached the final paragraph. "This section," Rachel said, tapping the page lightly, "authorizes proxy delegation under defined governance circumstances." She paused, letting that settle. "The authorization is valid unless explicitly revoked." Gregory shifted in his chair. I could hear it through the silence. Rachel continued. Slower now. "The approval appears at the end of the document." She turned the page toward the board. "Signed by Gregory Fallon, acting as Chief Financial Officer." She looked up. 15 years ago. The room froze. No coughing, no shuffling. Even Gregory's breathing seemed to stop. The signature sat there, unmistakable, dark against the page. He had written the rule. He had enforced it for years. And now it had turned on him. I felt it then. Not triumph, but release. A quiet satisfaction that didn't need expression. This wasn't revenge. It was alignment. The system had found its balance. Gregory opened his mouth, then closed it. Whatever argument he had prepared no longer fit the moment. Rachel said nothing more. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke with more authority than any voice in the room. Harold Whitman cleared his throat. The sound carried weight. He had been quiet throughout this process. Careful, observant. Now he leaned forward, hands folded. "Given the circumstances," he said, "I'm calling for a vote to temporarily suspend Gregory Fallon's authority pending the audit." No one objected. The vote was swift, almost merciful. When it passed, Gregory stared straight ahead, stunned, as if the ground beneath him had shifted without warning. The silence afterward was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. I stayed still, letting the pressure drain from my chest. 15 years of restraint released in a single, undeniable truth. As the meeting adjourned, I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Gregory had collapsed under his own signature, and the weight I had carried finally lifted, replaced by clarity and calm that felt earned, complete and irreversible. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, after the room has already decided who no longer belongs at the center of it. Gregory Fallon asked to speak with me privately after the vote. And for the first time, he waited. That alone told me how much had changed. He looked smaller without authority to lean on. Not humbled. Exactly, just stripped of options. He tried to begin with indignation, but it faded quickly. "You went too far," he said, though there was no force behind it. I listened, calm, measured, letting him spend what little leverage he had left. Gregory insisted this would damage the company. He warned of instability, of reputational fallout, of chaos that would somehow be my responsibility. I didn't interrupt. I had spent years watching him mistake volume for control. Now there was nothing to interrupt. When he finally paused, I spoke once. "I didn't sell the company. I used the rule you wrote." The sentence landed harder than anything shouted earlier that week. Gregory stared at me, searching for a counter that didn't exist. He knew the truth. He had always known it. Buried under habit and entitlement, the systems he designed to protect his authority had simply worked as designed. Just not for him. The board joined us moments later. No one raised their voice. Harold Whitman spoke with quiet finality, outlining next steps, governance continuity, and the need for leadership that could withstand scrutiny. Then he looked directly at Gregory. "We're asking for your resignation," he said. Gregory didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue with. He nodded once, stiffly, and stood. That was it. No escort, no drama. Power doesn't need spectacle when it ends. As he left, Victor Lane stepped forward, efficient and composed. He handed me a signed addendum without ceremony. "The proxy authority reverts to you," he said. "Effective immediately. $1, already transferred. Exactly as agreed." I accepted it without reaction. The authority had done its work. Holding it longer would have meant nothing. Control isn't about possession, it's about placement. When the room cleared, I remained seated, breathing evenly, feeling no rush, no triumph, just balance. Gregory's fall wasn't my victory. It was the conclusion of a sequence he had started long before I understood its shape. I stood and gathered my things, aware of eyes watching me differently now. Calm followed me out of the room, steady and unchallenged. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't demanded justice. I had simply allowed structure to do what emotion never could. That was the confrontation. Quiet. Precise. Absolute. The days after Gregory Fallon stepped aside were quieter than I expected. No headlines chased the story. No leaks dripped into the press. Instead, the audit moved forward with professional indifference, the way serious consequences usually do. Teams asked questions, records surfaced. Decisions once explained away were suddenly examined in sequence. I felt satisfaction first. Subtle but unmistakable. Not joy, not vindication. Just the calm of watching truth operate without interference. The auditors didn't speculate or editorialize. They traced approvals, timelines, and authority chains. Gregory's patterns emerged clearly: unilateral decisions, bypassed controls, and risk disguised as confidence. None of it dramatic, all of it damaging. What followed wasn't collapse, but correction. Contracts were reviewed, committees restructured, policies reinstated that Gregory had quietly sidelined for convenience. No one shouted, no one needed to. The company adjusted itself the way a body does after removing a long-ignored strain. Relief came next. I noticed it when my shoulders stopped tightening every time my phone rang. When emails arrived asking for clarification, not defense. When people spoke to me without lowering their voices. The tension that had lived under my skin for years finally loosened, replaced by something steadier. Gregory's name appeared less frequently as the days passed. Eventually, only in formal reports and legal footnotes. There was no public shaming, no spectacle, just accountability recorded, processed, and filed. Justice doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply proceeds. Then the board called. The tone was different from every conversation before it. Respectful, measured. Harold Whitman spoke carefully, acknowledging my role, my restraint, and the clarity I had brought to an unstable situation. He outlined the board's decision to create a new position, one focused on governance oversight and operational continuity. Independent, advisory, removed from daily politics. "We'd like you to return," he said, "if you're willing." I didn't answer immediately. The offer carried weight, but so did the cost of accepting it. I had regained my voice without reclaiming my old seat. That mattered. I thanked them and asked for time. After the call ended, I sat alone, listening to the quiet. Satisfaction softened into contemplation. Relief settled into something deeper. I realized I wasn't eager to step back into the structure that had once required me to disappear for it to function. The proposal wasn't closure. It was acknowledgement, and that, I discovered, was enough. I hadn't sought noise or revenge. I had wanted balance. The audit delivered it. The board recognized it, whether I returned or not. The outcome stood. Justice had arrived without spectacle, leaving behind something far more durable than applause, a system corrected, a lesson recorded, and a calm that no longer needed defending. I folded the offer letter and set it aside, knowing that dignity does not require permanence. Sometimes the most honest ending is a pause, allowing systems to breathe and people to remember why rules exist, even after the noise fades, without anyone needing to intervene. Peace arrived slowly. The way it does after a long storm finally moves on. I declined the board's offer to return to my old position without hesitation. That role belonged to a version of me who believed stability required sacrifice. I had learned otherwise. Going back would have restored comfort, not truth. And I no longer needed either. Instead, I accepted a different path. I agreed to serve as an independent advisor, bound by principle rather than hierarchy. No title to defend, no chain of command to navigate. My responsibility was simple: protect process, question power, and leave when clarity replaced dependence. Freedom, I discovered, isn't the absence of responsibility. It's choosing responsibility without fear. The paperwork arrived a week later, clean and precise. A single page confirmed the return of my voting rights. The price was symbolic: $1 transferred electronically. A reminder that authority isn't measured by cost, but by consent. I signed, paused, and felt nothing dramatic, just alignment. My voice had come home because its work was finished elsewhere. I didn't celebrate. I closed my laptop, walked through my quiet house, and noticed how light everything felt. No calls to anticipate, no meetings to prepare defenses for. Justice had already done its work, and it hadn't required me to raise my voice once. Looking back, I understand what Gregory never did. Power isn't something you hoard or brandish. It isn't proven by volume or fear. It's sustained by restraint and timing. Mine had never been for sale, only misplaced. I stepped forward again on my own terms, free of resentment and obligation, grounded in something sturdier than position. Power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from knowing when to speak. That lesson remains with me, steady and certain, guiding every decision that follows from now on. What this journey taught me is simple, but lasting. Real power doesn't rush, shout, or demand applause. It waits, understands the rules, and moves with intention. I didn't win by being louder or angrier. I won by staying steady when others lost control. If this story felt familiar, I wonder where you're listening from right now, and what quiet battle you've been carrying yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let others learn from your experience too. If this message resonated, a like or share helps it reach someone who may need it today. And if you want more stories about dignity, justice, and calm strength, subscribe and stay with me. Subscribe and stay with me. Subscribe and stay with me.